Well, the lack of accountability and the lack of justice, social justice and other forms of justice was a major driver of the 2011 uprisings. And so there's no question that accountability in its multiple forms, and justice and transitional justice more broadly, are important for state building and for conflict resolution. When you look at some of the countries in the Arab region, the current violent conflicts that persist in the Arab region, the lack of accountability and the lack of justice, if those issues are not addressed in the immediate term, they will rear their ugly head again in the near future.
At the moment, we're living a time when citizens' faith in the state is probably at its lowest ever. There is very little confidence in the ability of the state to do the most basic of services, to deliver services, to provide security, to provide possibilities for political participation and so on. So there is a broad overall demand that the state should reform. Now that is very important, and state building is very important if we are to achieve any of the development goals that we're all aspiring for.
Well, economic development is the core of what makes a good society. At the end of the day, people want to have prosperity. And as long as you have prosperity that can be passed on from generation to generation and people's lot improves, you have a happy, productive society. It's not just about macroeconomic growth, it's about inclusive growth. At the end of the day, inclusive growth, in my opinion, is jobs. What creates jobs? It's not enough to have high-rise towers, malls, false forms of development that maybe make a city look more flashy and modern, but they're not productive. They don't produce jobs, good jobs. And so that's the real challenge for the Arab world. And I think when they're able to effectively come up with the right policies to ensure that, we're going to see a productive, happier society.
We need to do a number of things almost simultaneously. Number one is to focus on governance and governance reform as opposed to government. The other, which I think is very important also, is to take a regional look at the region and stop dealing bilaterally state by one state at a time. We need to look into mega development projects that can provide the numbers of employment that are needed in the region. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of jobs have got to be created and pretty soon. Without doing interstate, intergovernmental, collaborative projects, big scale of transport, railways, connecting people, it's very unlikely that we would free the potential of the region to provide the jobs that are required. And the third, which is equally important, is to focus a little bit on the how rather than the what in terms of services. For many, many years, the state has been fixated on delivering services and ticking the box that we've done this, numbers, statistics and so on. I think people now expect something slightly different.
So building a state requires institutions, and institutions require money. And increasingly today we know, whether it's the Arab world or beyond, the fiscal space that many countries have is shrinking. And that's the reality of our tax base. We're no longer able to acquire taxes from many of the corporations, partly because the regulations for corporations really favor them to be able to have many different, not only headquarter locations, but to basically go to areas where they can effectively avoid taxation. That's not illegal, but it's the reality of the international system. So we need to be able to have a bottom-up growth that means people have good jobs and we can tax that base. So it's an imperative if you're going to build healthy institutions. By that, we need education, we need infrastructure, we need all of the key formations of a modern society, and that requires fiscal space, and governments can only get that today from personal taxation. So the two are intimately connected.